At the school where my granddaughter attends, something occurred in 2020. The true cause of Marcus Lamb's death was unknown for years until today. Finally, a book that was kept hidden from everyone has been discovered. And what's within causes us to reevaluate all of our preconceived notions. Nobody anticipated this, but Joni Lamb's innermost thoughts revealed sinister details, startling motivations, and an unexpected aspect of their narrative. Was it melancholy or something more sinister? This is more than simply a huge shock. It's quite unexpected. All Christians could be shocked by what comes next. It all started with what appeared to be a horrible incident. Christians around the world were startled by this abrupt and devastating loss. November 2021 saw the death of Marcus Lamb. He led Daystar Television and Network with courage and charm. The official explanation was COVID-19 complications. He voiced opposition to vaccination orders and lockdowns. Many believed that his rapid death from the illness was a sad comedy. For a while, the attention of friends, family, and those who watched and followed was on sadness. However, minor queries started to surface once everything was finished. Family members and acquaintances of Marcus began to suspect that something wasn't quite right. The timeline appeared hurried. Not everyone was happy with the outcome. Some even had the unimaginable thought, was this merely a medical mishap? Or perhaps Marcus's death had more to it than anyone wanted to discuss? It wasn't strangers on the internet that started the rumors. They began with those who were familiar with the Lamb family, such as those who had seen things that didn't seem right and knew Marcus well. It was simply painful at first. Then there was uncertainty. We'll now travel to Texas, where a battle with COVID-19 claimed the life of Marcus Lamb, the contentious CEO of a Christian TV station. When the conservative televangelists network, Daystar, provided hours of exposure to organizations and campaigners opposing vaccinations and lockdowns last year, it garnered a lot of attention. Almost immediately after Marcus's death, Joni Lamb, his wife and lifelong mission partner, gained notoriety. She thanked those who had been praying for her and discussed her loss in emotional interviews. However, they soon noticed something odd. Things were happening very fast. In the weeks following Marcus's passing, Joni appeared to be growing closer to counselor Doug Weiss, who had a troubled history. They spread the word that they were getting together. Before Marcus passed away, did they get to know one another better? Had something else been happening on the entire time, or was it their sadness that was drawing them together? Inside the Daystar network, tensions increased. Changes became apparent to those who worked for or with the family. Joni was taking on more responsibility than ever before, decisions were being made more quickly, and some points of view were being excluded. She was no longer the only one who was sad. Many were beginning to question whether Marcus's passing had created space for someone or something new. The suspicions intensified when Doug Weiss filed for divorce just 2 months after Marcus's passing. The timing was strange, everything appeared to be moving too easily. There were indications that Marcus's passing was more than just a watershed. It might have been the first coin to fall in a series of events that had been prearranged from the beginning. Marcus's illness seemed to last longer than they claimed. Were decisions taken in private and kept secret? It wasn't outsiders who were promoting these beliefs. People in the Lamb group who loved Marcus and didn't like what they saw asked questions like these. In the midst of it all, the most agonizing question of all was if Joni knew more than she was admitting. I was caring for Marcus on the final night I was with him in the hospital. She told me that she simply stood there in the dark and stared at me at around 3 in the morning. My purpose is to serve. As she turned to face me, she exclaimed, "Look what you have done to this family." I told my mother via text, "I can't do this anymore. You understand the anguish in my heart," I said to God. This family is being destroyed by my child and me. My last night was that one. The following day, he dies. Nobody wanted to believe it. Not initially. However, it became more difficult to ignore as more details emerged, including how the tale was managed, how the relationship was hurried, and how Daystar's leadership evolved. What had started out as a tragic death was gradually turning into something far more challenging. Those who had previously trusted Joni and the church were beginning to have their doubts. People started to speculate what had happened as soon as Marcus Lamb passed dead. At first, it was all about melancholy. On Christian television and radio, the man's voice was powerful. A spiritual leader with a large fan base. When he passed away unexpectedly, everyone was startled, especially his loved ones. But as the weeks passed, the narrative began to shift. The murmurs grew louder. People started to notice that Joni Lamb, Marcus's widow, was acting strangely. Not only was she depressed, but she was also letting go. Fast. It's Doug Weiss now. As a well-known Christian counselor, Doug's role was to assist people in recovering from addiction, faith loss, and broken marriages. At first impression, he appeared to be a decent man, silent, peaceful, and confident in his beliefs. Joni started spending time with Doug after Marcus passed away. A lot of people assumed it was merely a friendship. By guiding her through her suffering and providing consolation during a trying moment, he may have been assisting her in coping with the loss. However, things weren't always so simple. The way they spoke to one another quickly altered. There were no longer only two injured individuals supporting one another. Together, they attended events and engaged in conversations that looked overly intimate and personal. Social media posts featured unfriendly smiles and body language that made people take a second look. Before anyone could fully comprehend what was happening, the rumors soon circulated. Joni and Doug were more than just pals. They were more than that. Not only was it shocking to everyone that Joni had turned to someone else for solace. It was the speed with which everything happened. Despite Marcus's 2-month absence, Doug filed for divorce from his wife of almost 30 years. At that point, the timing started to seem suspect. Some folks put the pieces together. How could a man who had been married for decades look for a new relationship so quickly? Furthermore, how could Joni be prepared for a new relationship so soon after losing her husband? It was illogical. Not to those who were listening intently, anyway. I went to Daystar in the afternoon to grab something from the cafe. There was something in the green room, and my child was with me. I could tell she was afraid, so we stopped taking her there. She was at home with a babysitter. This time, though, I had to obtain something pretty fast. When I enter, it is midday. It's terrible that I brought her into the green room when I didn't anticipate seeing anyone else. His wife and feet enter as I'm going to retrieve that food package. They were incredibly afraid for my kid. She collapsed beneath the table, her power gone. I took hold of her tiny body. After I picked her up, I slammed into the car. It was frightening, I recall, when I told some close relatives about it. My self-talk was, I'm not bringing my child here. It wasn't just idle talk either. Longtime acquaintances of the Lamb family made this statement. Friends, colleagues, insiders, and even Joni's own children. Jonathan, the son of Marcus and Joni, and Susie Lamb, their daughter-in-law, began to raise the alarm in public. They expressed their frustration with Joni's choices, the speed at which things were moving, and their sense that the principles their family had upheld were being transformed into something else. It was more than just time for them. It all boiled down to faith, devotion, and whether Joni was truly depressed or already planning her next move. The way Joni reacted in public further complicated matters. She made no effort to conceal herself from the reporting. She actually defended herself. She mentioned she and her family had benefited from Doug's help. She described how they had prayed for one another, supported one another, and discovered love when they were in pain, and how God had brought them together. She maintained that everything was okay and that their relationship was founded on faith and was pure and holy. However, many people didn't find much meaning in those remarks because actions speak louder than words. They showed me other documents, including emails and text messages. I was thinking, okay, now I need to talk to Jonathan and Susie again. To hear their viewpoint, I'm going to do that this morning. But I won't travel back and forth any longer. I saw what they showed me. I listened to both sides. I felt a spiritual connection when I spoke with Jonathan and Susie. There were several feelings I experienced when I visited Daystar. Today, this interview will be posted. Anyone can dissect it, examine it, critique it, or say whatever they want. I have the right and fairness to post the interview. It doesn't matter how people feel about it. After that, I'll discuss what they showed me in one final movie. There was more to Doug Weiss than just therapy. Grief was something he understood how to handle. Someone who should have understood that recovery takes time and that grieving shouldn't be hurried. Marcus was assuming the roles of guardian, partner, and even potential husband before his memory had even had time to settle. People felt deceived by the entire vision they had adhered to, not just by Joni. Daystar was the one. Faith, family, and trust were supposed to be the cornerstones of the mission. It was starting to resemble an organized event or a soap opera. Some others questioned, were Doug and Joni close before Marcus died? Did they have a secret affection for one another? When Marcus left to battle COVID, was Doug prepared to go? Those were some difficult questions. Furthermore, Joni did little to defuse the situation. Rather than confronting the reports head-on, she frequently avoided discussing them. She wrote about letting God decide what was right, love, and healing. She said that she was the victim of a deception campaign and that people were unaware of how sorrow operated. However, she was now being asked by more than just strangers. It was her family and employees, who had cherished her for many years. The most agonizing aspect of the entire situation was not only the reporting. It was the way it divided people. The Lamb family started to disintegrate. Susie and Jonathan were obviously quite depressed. It wasn't only a parent they lost. They believed that they were losing their mother as well. The woman standing confidently next to Doug Weiss was someone they had never met. They had no idea why Joni was so combative when they told her what was bothering them or how she could move on so fast. To be honest, they were too preoccupied with art and film. When I married Dr. Doug Weiss, who has been such a joy to me, my family, and Daystar, Jonathan's frustration at not getting his way only grew worse. I adore my family, therefore as a mother and grandmother, I can tell you that this saddens me greatly. All of my children are loved. I adore my grandchildren and children. I'm glad we've collaborated for so long. Additionally, I had anticipated that we could have resolved this in private. However, Jonathan has now forced me to speak. Everyone is aware that sharing Jesus' love with others is the purpose of our lives. It also tears my heart to watch my son Jonathan and his wife assault. Yes, I would like you to be aware that none of the charges against my late husband and I are accurate. And it wasn't just them. Fans of Daystar began to question what was happening behind the scenes. Donations decreased. There were fewer onlookers. Those who once watched weekly were apprehensive about what they saw. They questioned whether the network's mission was still to share the gospel or if it had evolved into a means of defending an individual's agenda. When Joni and Doug announced they were getting married, everything reached a breaking point. For some, it was the final straw. Even though Marcus had only been dead for a year, she was already preparing to remarry. It seemed hurried. I felt horrible about it. The fact that it wasn't even about love confirmed many people's worst suspicions. Rule and power were on the line. Departing from the hole that Marcus had created. Joni maintained that God had brought her to Doug and that she was only following her heart. She added that after all the suffering she had endured, she deserved another chance at love. However, several individuals didn't think she was real. They were unwilling to give up the rhythm, the pace, and the silence around significant inquiries. It's accurate. It's also obvious that we will never be able to adequately explain what we have been through in the last few years because of how extremely distressing it has been. I don't even want to discuss how difficult the process of what that looked like was. When you are not dependent on a select few and continue to demand justice only to have it denied or disregarded, you are free. It is comparable to striking a wall. There is contentment and tranquility now that the narrative has been shared and people have responded to it. I had the impression that when everyone shared our parents' sentiments, the doors of justice would open. We really wanted to make a short movie. Right now, we don't want to share our entire story. Jonathan and I are taking a brief pause to respond to certain inquiries. In the end, it wasn't only that Joni and Doug were becoming too close too soon. It discussed how such intimacy led to a shift in values, a decline in trust, and an increasing concern that those in command of one of the biggest Christian networks in the world might not be as sincere or committed as they initially appeared to be. The inquiries never stop. The scrapes and cuts are still painful. What occurred still shocks those who formerly looked up to Joni as a symbol of strength and dedication. What comes next? We'll find out in time. However, the damage is already done. Furthermore, the tale of Joni and Doug is no longer solely about love. People interpret it as evidence of all the issues they believe exist with the Christian leadership of today. When the whispers shifted from discussing relationships and loss to more frightening subjects, such as allegations that the Lamb family's own granddaughter had been mistreated, the narrative took a far darker turn. Initially, the narrative focused on a widow who moved on too quickly after her husband passed away. However, it later devolved into a torturous, disorganized mix of cover-ups, family anguish, and severe emotional harm that nobody was prepared to deal with. We will be doing podcasts with wonderful folks in which we discuss profound and significant topics. Our tale was shared with one or more writers, who are now responsible for their own writing. We have no authority. We were truthful. They conduct the study. Months pass throughout that time. It is time-consuming. To put it another way, this has been happening for some time. It has been growing worse. I'm proud of them since they completed their study. I proposed that we make the film since I had no idea how popular it would become. I didn't really think, but Jonathan did. Given how much we've been loved and featured on TV, I felt it would be cruel to ignore some of the questions that those who truly care about us ask. In the past several days, we have been asked the following 4 questions the most. 1. Why didn't we contact the police and why did it take so long to speak? 2. What kept me from grabbing this man? 3. Why did Susie yell for me to climb rather than climbing herself? 4. Why do we not go public? It started out slowly, practically in the background of the main event. Jonathan, the son of Marcus and Joni, and their daughter-in-law Susie Lamb became aware of their young daughter's odd behavior. She would act apprehensive in situations where she was accustomed to being around certain people and freeze up around them. After a while, it was obvious that something was wrong. Initially, it appeared like she might simply be going through a difficult time. Then, during a family vacation in the summer of 2020, she revealed something that completely rocked their world. She witnessed something that should never be shown to children. At that moment, everything changed. Susie and Jonathan were taken aback. They were unsure about what to think. The man their daughter said was someone they knew. Someone believed. He was a resident of the Daystar universe. Someone who was familiar with the church and the family. They attempted to remain calm and consider the fact that they were on the brink of something significant. Something that could ruin their family and the church as a whole. After that, the journey of trying to be heard and being disregarded was arduous and protracted. We didn't call the cops, so why? We did, of course, make 2 police calls. What kept you from speaking sooner? The second question is that. Since a story is so long, I know there will be some back and forth, so let's review the time frame. We will therefore proceed cautiously. We will produce a very short version because this will be a short film. Everything will continue to surface. We've included some comments regarding the key points here. Let's start at the very beginning. My sister noticed that my daughter was acting abnormally in the early spring of 2020, tightening up when strangers approached her. In the summer of 2020, I would begin. And I started to see that. But I didn't really take it seriously. I thought it was a typical aspect of maturing. This man claims that during their summer vacation, our daughter saw him completely nude in a restroom. Here, we'll use a little caution when we speak. I had never heard of any of this before. Choosing what to do with it was difficult for me. Okay, was all I said because he instructed me to. I went to see how my child was doing. I said, okay. I assumed she was okay. I may or may not have told you that day. Jonathan and Susie did not act immediately because they believed that no one at Daystar would pay attention to them. They were advised to exercise caution, keep quiet, consult their tutors, and avoid disturbance. They were instructed to remain within the system and have faith in the process. However, there was an issue with the procedure. It went slowly, did nothing, and watched for Daystar's photo rather than the youngster. Even the grandmother and mother, Joni, took longer to respond than they had intended. They were advised not to call the police immediately by a family member Susie truly trusted. To hold off. To converse with those inside. Not to make a scene. When they eventually called the police, they felt as though the door had already begun to close, so they were unable to get past that moment of uncertainty. The walk was chilly. They had already begun to hear a different story from the people they trusted. What should have been an obvious moment of safety became a perplexing and agonizing battle. The situation worsened. I had never done this before, so I asked my child. I'm not familiar with lead questions. I believed it to be at school. She knew just Daystar, home, and school. Is it at school? I inquired. She simply nodded because she was afraid. I now know why she behaves in this manner thanks to psychologists. I inquired, was it a girl or a boy? A boy, she said. How tall are you, in an attempt to determine the age? She remarked, taller than Daddy. That made me scared, because that person is a man. A 5-year-old wouldn't say that incorrectly. Speeding up, next we headed to school. When the professors told my trusted friend and I, there's no male here, we were like, okay, we've done our part. For now, that's all. I said to Jonathan, I don't want to be talked out of this. I don't want to discuss anything with your family. The cops must be called. We lodged a report and phoned the police. They conducted a brief probe because there wasn't much to go on. When their daughter eventually revealed to them in graphic detail that she had been mistreated, the truth slammed them like a freight train. No error occurred. This was not just a child who was afraid. It was authentic. Susie and Jonathan were now aware of their obligations. They advocated for responsibility. They have to be aware. However, they encountered difficulties again, this time from both Daystar and their own relatives. They were not receiving the necessary assistance from Joni, who was becoming more intimate with Doug Weiss. She defended those they were interrogating. She refused to allow probing from outside. Rather than allowing true justice to be served, she employed polygraph tests to prove her innocence. Susie and Jonathan felt as though they had been misled. As they descended farther, it became increasingly solitary. Joni publicly said that the allegations were untrue. She claimed to adore all of her children and grandchildren. However, her actions suggested otherwise. She supported the accused individual. She refused to leave. Above all else, she refused to listen. Susie once described how their kid was abruptly brought into a room with the alleged abuser, causing her body to go slack with terror. The frightened child collapsed beneath a table, immobile. That wasn't the case. It wasn't a fabrication. It was awful. However, when they told other family members about it, they did get their belief. Others didn't. The situation was exacerbated by public pressure. Susie and Jonathan had to choose between risking further suffering by telling everyone about their daughter's safety or keeping her secure in secret. Ultimately, though, they felt they had no choice but to speak up. They didn't do it for vengeance or fame. Their goal was not just to protect their child. They wanted to protect other children. Other family, perhaps. Additionally, Marcus Lamb's heritage seemed to be being transformed into something that no one could identify.